I absolutely love starting a podcast with a mindfulness moment. This is already like truly how I know that we are going to be podcast soulmates, because that was the best thing that anyone could have ever done.
I think I told you the last time we chatted that we're in the middle of like flying by the seat of our pants and traveling in this summer. And so it's like, okay, I don't have all my tools and my shit with me. So like let me just breathe for a moment. Like we
Literally.
forget the power
Yeah.
of that. I'm stoked to have you here. Before we hopped on, I was like, I'm so excited because I feel like this is gonna be a raw and real conversation, which
Yeah.
I always love. Like skip the small talk, let's get into it.
It's gonna be perfect. I can't wait. Plus, we already did the small talk last time we chatted, so it's
I
great.
know, exactly. So I typically like to start off these conversations with you talking about any catalytic moments that you've had that really brought you to where you are today with downtown behavioral wellness, or just like where you are in your life. Do you have a handful of moments thus far in your life that just like were explosions, but actually turned out to be like the best things ever?
Yes. Yes. I feel like I've lived 1,000 different lives, and so I can definitely highlight a couple of those. I would say one of those catalytic moments was when I walked into my first econ class in undergrad, because I was like, oh, I'm going to be an attorney. And so I need econ. And then I was like, this is not for me. And I just like landed in an upper level psych class. And I was just like, I could never imagine doing anything else. I was like, this is just so well suited for me. And I feel like that was such a huge, I mean, that literally changed the course of my entire life.
Wow.
I would say getting divorced and going to live in Tel Aviv. Probably.
Wait, we gotta pause. And I had no idea you were divorced. When did
Oh,
this
yeah.
happen?
Oh, I got married at 22 and divorced in like 10 years later.
Wow. So you were married. Wow, married for 10 years though in
I
Tel
was
Aviv?
married for 10 years to the wrong person. Like, we never should have been married, but you don't get married at 22 if you want to stay married. So,
Yeah, a lot of change goes on then.
yeah, major chaos, big chaos vibes.
How was the healing journey with healing through heartbreak?
You know, it's actually interesting, and that was going to be my third catalyst, was my breakup that I had in Israel with, I think, the first person that I actually ever loved. Because my divorce was so, I had been grieving the fact that I made a decision like in basically childhood for so many years before I finally kind of pulled the plug, that I, for me, that wasn't as pivotal. I think it was more of the actual me being willing to make the decision that was pivotal. In terms of healing and things I've learned about myself introspectively, like in relationships, that's like my third big moment, which is I had a serious boyfriend when I was living in Tel Aviv, and like I just kind of blew it up in a couple of different ways, like through my own, because of my own dysregulation and my own like not addressing certain issues that had been present for forever. And so healing through that heartbreak really got me to, I mean, that was my first year of my business. So that really got me to the place where I am now, which is really reconnect back in New York City, really reconnected with my closest and dearest friends, running a thriving private practice, and I now have an incredible, amazing boyfriend that I would not have been able to have if I had not gone through all of the prior events that I had just mentioned.
Right. You mentioned, well, one, I have to say that I feel like a lot of women, there's this quote that a lot of women know like 2 to 3 years before they're breaking up with a long-term relationship, or at least a year. And then it's like when they actually do it, it's like not as much of like a grieving healing process. Of course it is, but it's like us women, I feel like over intellectualize probably a little bit more the situation and put it under a
1,000,000%.
microscope. And so I remember when I broke up with my ex of 8 years, I was actually okay, like quite quickly afterwards, but it's because I was ruminating for so long that I was like, okay, I'm so crystal clear on this.
Correct. Like the radical acceptance came for me so much before. I do think there was like some emotional avoidance for me after the fact, which is like led me to just be like kind of chaotic, like in the wake of my divorce. I had like not had my 20s, you know, like I had never dated, I had never done any of those things, and suddenly I was single and 30, you know, so there was chaos, which I think was coming from not addressing emotions, but I don't think they were emotions related to heartbreak. I think they were more I like identity shift related emotions, like shame. like around like, who am I? You know, why am I like this? Why am I so young and divorced? And I think that once I addressed those issues, which really came after my next breakup and the transition to move back to New York City, that's, I think, when I really healed all the way, if you will.
Right. What were the steps that you took to help you move forward through like that tumultuous time?
Oh, okay. Very good question.
I
I could
think
literally
people
talk
want to
about this.
know.
I talk about this, and I talk about this to my patients all the time. It's one of the things I love about the way that I provide treatment and the way that, like, the framework we use in DBT. It's just really genuine. So, you know, how many young women and men are going through breakups or fear of being alone? And so it's really nice to be able to lean on my own experience. And I would say, you know, my therapist was incredibly helpful, like being able to really try to listen to what she was saying. Like, I just really wanted a structure just to help me feel better because I was so lost. I mean, I changed my SSRIs around. I can't deny that that was helpful for me personally. And I think that coming to the acceptance that, yes, I did things that were not helpful and not effective. And at the same time, like, there was an opportunity for me to do, like, I don't need to have that relationship to be able to have a meaningful relationship was really important for me in figuring out, like, how do I actually find a meaningful relationship? And the summer after my breakup, I also decided to get certified in Pilates because I needed a goal. Like, I needed a consistent goal. So now I have a Pilates certification as a result of my breakup, but I'm not mad about it.
When I was going through just like transitional periods like that, it's like that's your moment to really focus on yourself. And I feel like it sounds, when I talk to my friends who are single, they like totally eye roll at me, but I'm just like, this is such a sacred time that you don't get back. It's
You
like
need
I'm
it.
on the other side of things. Like I love my fiance. I'm so excited to get married, but there's like a mourning period of your single life too. And like
Yeah,
even being a fiance too, it's like every single change is so hard. So like really, you'll never be with this version of yourself again. Like really soaking up
correct.
what this moment has to show you, to tell you what practices can you
Yes.
integrate, what can you learn. It's like that always like really helped push me to embody my best self in those like really challenging moments.
I completely agree. And I feel like you could probably relate if you were in an 8-year relationship. Like, I had thought I was like this independent gal, which I was in many respects, or am,
Yeah.
but was in a different way in many respects. But I had never really been single. Like, I got divorced and then I got a boyfriend like just a little while later because, again, I was like, okay, I have radically accepted this 7 years ago, so I'm good. Of course, in hindsight, I wouldn't recommend doing that. But, you know, like, I had never really been alone until I was broken up with. I was the one being broken up with. And I was living in a foreign country. And I was like, I don't know what to do, like what to do with myself. So that was
Mm-hmm.
hugely important. Like being able to sit with that, like sometimes feeling of emptiness, like being able to like practice mindfulness of knowing like what my urges are and not acting on them and just like sitting back, saying no to plans for the first time in my entire life. Like these are things that
Yeah.
I would not be the version of myself that I feel most comfortable in, which is this version, without having like all of those trials and tribulations, which I was lucky enough to take advantage of. Like the universe gave that to me.
Totally. I completely like mirror back to you. Like when I was in an 8-year relationship, I thought I was this like strong, independent woman, but I always kind of had that sense of safety. And then when that
Mhm.
left, it was like, it was liberating, but also like, oh shit. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I thought that was there that entire time.
Yeah.
And it was like this knowingness that like, okay, I'm good there. So let me focus time on other things. And that completely shifts your perspective and energy. But
Totally.
you mentioned, okay, CBT, DBT, and MBSR. So cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and
You bet.
mindfulness-based stress reduction. Tell
Yep.
me more about these because you use all three of these in your practice.
Yes. If you couldn't tell, in psychology, we absolutely love an acronym. It's
Yeah.
like so obnoxious, but does help because the long-winded names are challenging. So cognitive behavioral therapy is and has been pretty popular, I would say, the last, let's call it 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
It's a treatment that is founded in the fact that we can change our emotional experience by challenging thoughts that are unhelpful or untrue, right? So there's low validity thoughts and low utility thoughts. And by doing different cognitive exercises and, evidence finding, that's how you'll make yourself feel better.
So give an example for
Sure.
like some of the low validity thoughts.
Okay. So low utility thought is like something that's technically true, and at the same time, like, engaging in the like cycle of thinking about that thought is not helpful. So if I think about my own breakup, I think about the fact that, I had a thought like I did this to myself. And there's truth to that. Like, I know that my own reassurance seeking pushed a really great guy away. Okay? I know that. But the I did this to myself holds so little value in my being able to move forward, change my behavior, change my emotions, learn something. So that's why it's low utility. There is validity to it. There's a lot of validity to it. It's just like engaging with that thought is unhelpful. Whereas when we have a low validity thought, low validity usually comes with low utility. A low validity thought is like a self-judgment, right? Like, I'm so ugly, or I can't believe I'm so stupid. Like, you're not measuring against something real because it's subjective judgment. Another low validity thought could be like, I'm always going to be alone because I got broken up with, right? That's a low validity thought. You don't have evidence to back up that thought. So CBT challenges both of those types of thoughts to help people feel, less depression, less shame, less anxiety, increased, happiness, joy, reach goals, etc.
I've actually never done CBT. Is it mostly like repositioning and reframing? I mean, I know
Yes.
it's so much deeper than that, but like that seems like what it is.
That's exactly what it is. It's cognitive reframing is like the backbone to cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay,
Yes.
and then I feel like DBT is like your main sauce. I feel like
Yeah.
you really dive into DBT, which I know we talked about before, but it's still kind of confusing for me. So
Yes.
break it down.
I will absolutely break it down for you, because it is like my friends and my patients call me like the internet's DBT best friend, because it's my life's mission to like help people understand what being dialectical means. So dialectical behavior therapy is based in like the concept that everything in life can be a dialectic. There can be multiple truths at the same time, and not any one of those truths needs to cancel out another truth. So it can be like, I failed a test and I'm still a smart person, right? I failed the test doesn't mean I'm stupid. So that's like a very basic dialectic. And what does this mean from a treatment perspective, right? So dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, was created by Marsha Linehan in order to treat something called borderline personality disorder. It has since been normed on like everything, and every, like, there's research on its effectiveness in anxiety, OCD, depression, eating disorders, substance use disorders, like so many different things. But it started off as a treatment for anybody who experiences like a severe amount of emotion dysregulation, right? Like big highs, big lows, all in one day, a not a strong sense of self, impulsive behavior, all the way up to like wanting to die or self-harming. And it's a mindfulness based cognitive behavior heavy treatment that helps you live in a way that is less black and white, that is less self-judgmental, that is more long-term oriented. It helps you tolerate the distress of the emotions that you feel. But different than cognitive behavioral therapy, it is very, very focused on mindfulness. That is like that is the entire cornerstone of DBT, and changing behavior to almost basically like, you basically have to prove yourself different, if you will. Like, you have to prove yourself wrong. And when you are a high emotion person or high sensitivity person, you can't think your way out of thinking. Like, there's just too much rigidity and black and whiteness that goes on. And so learning to act differently and create new behavioral reactions actually changes your emotional vulnerability, not just in the moment, but long term.
It feels like it's more flow and higher awareness overall.
It's all about awareness. The way that I like to describe mindfulness is focused awareness, right?
Yes.
It's like any given moment, what am I feeling? What are my thoughts? Like, what am I observing, right? It's like I can look at myself and say, I notice these thoughts, right? I notice that I behaviorally want to, like, I want to text someone. I want to, blah, blah, you know what I mean? I want to go to the gym. I want to, whatever it is that's going to make me feel that thing less. I can label that emotion. And if I'm able to kind of capture that, like, you know, a selfie, if you will, then I can choose where I want to try to shift my attention to.
Totally. I feel like taking the seat of the observer was one of the very first tools I started to integrate into my day to day on my spiritual journey. I remember reading Viet Simpkins, like, Don't Just Sit There. And it
Yep.
taught me how to meditate like on the go, which I feel like you're a big proponent of as well. What
Yep.
other like mindfulness, soul centered practices do you integrate into your clients' life or help integrate?
Yeah, right. I attempt to, right? I
Yeah.
guide towards, and I'm
Yeah.
sure as, like, you know, as a spiritual coach, and like I like kind of consider you like a life coach because you have so much like life experience. I feel like you understand what I mean by guide someone towards. And ultimately, like,
Yeah.
you know, it's everyone's choice to come to it when they come to it. So the
Amen.
beauty, again, to me about DBT and mindfulness is that there's a lot of flexibility. Anything and everything can be a moment of meditation or mindfulness. Anything can be a moment where you ask yourself, where am I? You know, what's happening for me? Am I present or am I somewhere else? And it's an opportunity for you to, you know, flex that muscle, if you will, of bringing yourself back. And so there's a couple of probably more traditional practices that I go through with patients. And then there's a couple of, like, you know, more like quirky, wacky things that I'm like, try this as a mindfulness practice, right? So one of my favorite traditional practices is guided guided imagery. I'm sorry. Guided imagery is, to me, one of the most powerful tools in bringing somebody to the present. I really focus on the five senses, and I'll record a guided imagery for a patient, and they'll have like homeworks to utilize it either at night or once a day at a certain time. But, you know, focusing on helping somebody identify, right? Like, what is a place that makes me feel relaxed, or what is my favorite place? And then how can I bring myself through each of my senses there? I find it to be like incredibly powerful and incredibly grounding for myself. And so I'm assuming that it's going to be incredibly powerful and grounding for other people. I love guided imagery. I love something called paced breathing. So it's a little bit different than a deep breath or a diaphragmatic breath. Paced breathing is focused on the connection between your heartbeat and your breath, like, length. And if you are able to link them up properly, it actually turns on your parasympathetic nervous system so that it does slow your heart rate down. Or like, again, like if you can link them up, your parasympathetic nervous system will come on and your whole body will downregulate, if you will. And so a paced breathing is really focusing on taking an out breath that is at least 2 seconds longer than your in breath. And this is really helpful if somebody's having a panic attack, to like talk someone through this on the phone. Like, let's count your, like, you count on your hands. I'll count out loud. Like, keep your counts with me. And so we'll start with 3 on an inhale and 5 on an exhale. And then we'll expand. We'll like increase on that. And so it's really great for like those in the moment crises, but it's also really great for just an in the moment grounding.
100%. I love all this. I actually integrate a lot of these practices into, I mean, my day-to-day life for sure, and the work that I put out into the world. I just recently led a retreat in Sedona called the Wonder Retreat, and it's proven that this focused perception that you're talking about, or what'd you call it? Focused perception, right? Is what you
Focused awareness, but
Focused
same
awareness.
difference.
Okay. I say focused perception. And it's like
Right.
tuning into your senses
Yep.
activates your vagus nerve, which is one of the
Yep.
biggest nerves in your parasympathetic system, like lies at the base of your neck. And it activates this awe and wonder. It activates this feeling of awe and wonder, this undeniable like presence within your body and this interconnectivity within everything around you. And it's like, that's really where the power and the magic happens. It's like,
Yep.
presence is like, I don't know what your perspective is this, but like it's all coming back to presence for me.
Yeah.
Like,
It's like I had a mentor say to me once, and it was so impactful. Like, the past can harm you. The future can scare you, but nobody can hurt you in the present. Nothing can hurt you in the moment in which that you're in. And I'm
yeah.
really into Buddhist mindfulness, and that there's a big place for
Same.
that in DBT. And I really appreciate the only time you'll hear me say should, which is like implies, one right way, is there's a Buddhist saying that's everything is as it should be, right? In any particular moment, you don't necessarily need to change that moment. It doesn't mean that the next moment isn't an opportunity for something different to occur, but everything is as it should be. I find to be a difficult concept to accept, and a really, I think, like grounding, centering concept if you can get yourself there, particularly when you're going through something difficult.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you just have to surrender. And I think
Yep.
right now, I think that can be almost maybe triggering to some people now because it's like surrendering or just like, I feel like there's a lot of escapism in the world right now when it comes to spirituality. It's a big part of my work too. And so surrendering sometimes is like triggering for me because people are like living up here and not actually in their present awareness.
Right.
But speaking of up here, I do want to dive into a topic that you and I connected so much on the last time we spoke, which is the wise mind, because everything that we're talking about right now, the mindfulness practices, the power of presence, all create just a clear channel with God, source, the universe, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
This divine force that's guiding all of us each and every day. What is the wise mind? Like, what's your perception of intuition?
Sure. I absolutely love it. I'm smiling because I love listening to you talk, because like I love how enthusiastic you are about this work, and like you get it from like a different pathway, but it's all the same shit, like we're all doing the same shit from a different pathway. So it brings me so much joy to like listen to you talk about it, because I'm like, yes, you get it. Like you get it, and you can nerd out with me. So wise mind is this concept that it's a mindfulness concept where in any given moment we have two different parallel states of mind, and we can always utilize them to find our wise minds. In AA, we'd maybe call it the higher power, universe, God, whatever you want to call that. But it's really your intuition, right? So what we are always kind of leveling with is the emotional side of our mind, emotion mind, reasonable mind, and then we find wise mind by taking like the essence of each of those messages and combining them together. Not 50-50, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to feel good, but it's intuitively what is right. The thing that is going to move you forward, whatever that means. Like whether it be, not sending that text message when you're feeling lonely, because just sitting with that and calling a friend instead is actually going to help move you towards your goal of feeling more comfortable in your own self, right? So we need to ask ourselves, what is emotion mind saying to me, right? Is emotion mind saying to me, is it telling me to do something? Is it more impulsive? That's our emotion mind. Like it's generally more hot, it's more reactive. It's not really going to give a fuck, if you will, right? And then on the other side of that, we have reasonable mind, which tends to be more robotic and just more sort of like facts only, almost bordering on like judgment, almost like this is the right way, this is the wrong way. And the way that we make the decision is, the beauty of like, I think wise mind and DBT is it's not like you ever get to wise mind pinnacle. Like it's not like being in, the Garden of Eden. It's a decision by decision, like moment by moment, you can find wise mind. You can find what your wise mind is saying. And wise mind, like in and of itself, is always more than one option. There's never just one wise mind, right? There's different ways to honor the essence of what your emotion mind and your reasonable mind are saying to you to help you move forward in that moment intuitively.
100%. I feel like this is all resonating with me actually even more right now because I'm planning a wedding and it's fucking stressful. And I find myself in a highly emotional state far more often than usual.
Yeah.
How do you help people integrate this practice into their day-to-day life? Like, I think, and I want to be careful not to over intellectualize things because I tend to do that. Like, I think for me and for everyone, for a human being, it's so much easier to like live up here versus in here. But
Yep.
I think there's power in tracking these things
100%.
or, in order, it's like a practice, right?
Yep.
You have to build that muscle.
Yep.
How do you help your clients integrate and connect more with their wise mind?
Sure. I mean, I think that part of what makes DBT so successful is that there is an individual therapy piece and then there's a skills training piece, right? So then those two things are not together. I'm not teaching skills in my individual therapy. I'm helping people integrate what they're learning and figure out what's getting in the way of being able to like have a life worth living and live that life worth living through having the assistance of skills. But one of the beauties of DBT is that there is a concrete piece to it. And so like there is homework, right? I can ask somebody at any moment in time, do a Venn diagram of emotion mind, reasonable mind, and give me your like tell me what wise mind would have been in that moment. We can walk through that because yes, it is making it a little bit more high level cognitive, and at the same time it allows people to kind of grasp it. And particularly if you are a highly sensitive person, which I happen to be, when you are super in your feelings, you have a much harder time thinking in a linear fashion, right? That's just science. And so being able to like pull out a piece of paper and make a Venn diagram is incredibly helpful. Like that's a grounding activity. You know what I mean?
100%. I have to know, what's your big three? Astrology, do you know?
Wow. Of course I know, and you're gonna laugh. You're gonna laugh. I'm a Capricorn sun, duh.
Okay, I see that.
And then I'm a Cancer moon and rising, and they're sister signs, which means I'm like extra, if you will.
Yeah, I'm a Cancer sun. I am super sensitive and
Yes.
emotional, but I have a tough shell. Like I have a really tough shell, and sometimes it can be I can hold everything in though and compartmentalize everything. And so
Yep.
that's why actually that brings me to my next question on like your perspective on traditional therapy as well, because I feel like I did traditional therapy. Again, I haven't done CBT. I'm really interested in DBT. And I'm working right now with this company called Paradox Process, which is like a mantra based therapy, or they don't,
Yeah.
it's not a mantra based practice. They hate when I say therapy. But what's your perspective on just like traditional therapy actually exasperating wounds or like reopening wounds that don't necessarily need to be open? Like sometimes the door just needs to be shut and we need to move forward. We don't need to over intellectualize anymore. We don't need to we don't need to feel the feelings anymore. Like what's your perspective on that? Yeah, I guess in relationship to the work that you put out into the world.
Well, it's all a dialectic. I mean, the actual main goal of DBT is to be able to synthesize like whatever it is that you're at a war with and be able to feel the experience that you're feeling while not getting lost in it. And so, like when it comes to like insight oriented therapy, right? Like there's always a time and a place for insight. It's not like in dialectical behavior therapy we exist in a world where we're only thinking about the here and now. Like that's impossible. And in
Right.
order to actually validate and understand someone's behavior and where someone's emotions are coming from, you need to have an understanding of where these things are learned, right? As a cognitive behaviorist, I believe they're learned. Like everything we experience is learned. But the issue with insight oriented therapy only is that particularly for certain like archetypes of people, right? Certain personalities, certain, symptom presentations, like it's just not enough. Like sometimes people need help knowing what to do next. And sometimes people need more instruction, especially as a sensitive person. Like we didn't learn emotion regulation the same way that like non-sensitive person did, right? And so when we were in kindergarten and watching Bambi the last week of school and everyone cried when the mom died, and then you're the kid that's crying for the full hour after the movie and the teacher comes over you and you're like, don't worry about it. That's not something that a highly sensitive person can do. And so, right, being able to identify for yourself, am I avoiding an emotion or am I behaving in a way to move myself forward? Is staying with this emotion actually harming me at this point? That's the flexibility that DBT gives you. And that's the beauty of having, like, I like to think of DBT as like an attachment oriented behavioral treatment because it's so much of it has to do with the therapeutic relationship and what happens in the room and being direct and having feedback and collaboration. But it also, you have skills to help you actually figure out, like, I need to learn how to do this differently. Like staying in bed for a fourth month for me right now is not going to work, right? That's actually hurting me. And so even if my feelings are valid, I need to learn to act within my pain and not just like in pain all the time so that I can live a more full life. So I don't feel like my emotions are driving the car and they're like an 18-wheeler. Does that make sense?
This makes sense. I mean, you have two things that you brought up, and we're like almost out of time, and I have so many questions I want to dive into. But I'm
We can
curious
be
if
friends.
you integrate always, if you do you integrate like attachment styles? Do you talk about that in your work? And then you mentioned like inner child essentially, which is like, I feel like such a huge buzzword and kind of, trending right now, but it's so powerful. Do you integrate both of those into your work, and how do you work with them?
Sure. I mean, I tend to stay away, and you know this from my content. I tend to stay away from any sort of like isms, if you will, particularly when it comes to therapy, because I worry that, especially because of the way social media operates, that people will get attached to like the name and the identity and not actually understand it, and then gather all this information that's unhelpful. But yes, DBT is super attachment oriented. It's like a lot of reparenting, and it's a lot of inner child. Like it's a lot of understanding like why you feel so, why shame is such a huge determinant in like your behavior and in your life. Like where did that come from? Like
Right.
what is happening in your life right now that is reinforcing that? Right? How do we shift that
Mm-hmm.
around for you behaviorally so you can actually feel less shame when it is not warranted? That's reparenting yourself, and that's using the
Mm-hmm.
therapeutic relationship in order to understand your attachment style, right? Like it's using the therapeutic relationship, getting feedback, giving feedback, being able to have collaborative conversations, working through conflict. Working through conflict with
Mm-hmm.
your therapist is so important in DBT, like to the point that you can call your therapist outside of session and say like, I need to talk. Do you have 10 minutes? Because there's something that you said in session that I'd really like to talk about, right? Like that's an opportunity to address an anxious attachment style, whereas normally
Mm-hmm.
an anxious attachment style would be people pleasing. They wouldn't bring that up. You're creating a space for the patient to learn to be able to address those things and essentially, again, reorganize their attachment style. So I'll say to people, that's more of an anxious attachment style, but it's not, it's more focused on like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling?
Yeah,
Does that make
totally.
sense?
Yeah, 100%. I'm just thinking about like the gender silos that we created and how we're breaking through those and how that transcends to therapy. It's like where my mind is going.
Exactly.
Like we all just
Exactly.
need to be like tuning into our fullest expression. But
Exactly.
you've mentioned so many different ways that people can shift. But how can you, if we are aware of our like patterns, our triggers and everything, and I kind of like asked this before, like how can we truly like get unstuck from those things? Like how can we truly let go? It's like a matter of honoring and just accepting, right?
Radical
But like how do
acceptance.
you move? Yeah.
I think
Radical
radical
acceptance.
acceptance is the most powerful mindfulness tool, and particularly for people like myself, and I would wonder for you also, like, high success, high achievement oriented people. Like, I'm a change oriented person. Like, I'm like, all right, if I can change it, if I can fix it, great. So radical acceptance is something that, like, when I learned about it as a clinician and like when I started implementing it with patients, like you have to implement it in your own life. Like you have to, or you can't teach it. And this idea of letting go is not giving up, I think is really, really important. You're not giving
Oh,
up
that's
on
huge. Yeah.
yourself or on a goal if you let go of the like death grip you have on a particular outcome. And so
Mhm.
if there are things that you want in your life, you radically accept limitations. You don't radically give up. You don't just stop giving a fuck, right? And so radical acceptance actually allows you to let go of the suffering, which is usually the anger or the anxiety, and feel the actual sadness or loss without having a death grip on a certain outcome. It allows you to
Mm.
release the death grip on an outcome so that you can get to the same general vicinity, but you don't have to climb up the, whatever Spanish steps in Rome. You can get there by climbing up the Eiffel Tower. Like meaning it's the gateway into being able to have flexibility, I think. And
Mm.
I think that is a practice. That is not a one and done thing. That is something you need to ask yourself
Oh,
all the time. Am I radically accepting this?
yes, 100%. I'm like thinking back to wedding planning. We've had so many plot twists and pivots. Like it's been really,
Literally.
really hard to like embrace flow and honestly. And I'm like, I feel like I'm a rather chill bride for the most part, but it's ignited things inside of me that I'm like, oh my God, there's so many plot twists and everything. I'm like, sometimes I just have to like let what is like what will be kind of a thing, and like really let things flow. But you mentioned, my final question, you mentioned high performance New Yorkers. I feel you work with a lot of high performance urban dwellers and just high performance entrepreneurs. What are some of the practices and tools, some of the top tools that you provide these types of clients that you've really seen help cultivate like calm and mindfulness overall?
Sure. So it's really like, I think a lot of teaching the observe, describe, and participate that comes along with mindfulness allows you the opportunity to jump into other things. There's a lot of what we call distress tolerance. So how do I intentionally shift my focus and my awareness away from the distressing thought or the distressing physiological sensation for just enough time to practice just getting through that moment without going with the habitual stress pattern response, right? So lots of how do you sit with something, setting a timer, having a list of things that you can gently move your attention to. And it doesn't, I don't care what those things are as long as they're not unsafe. The goal is to practice being able to understand when and how you can utilize this like stepping back, the sort of acceptance of a moment, if you will. So there's a lot of distress tolerance. There's a lot of talking about radical acceptance of like anything and everything from, you know, God forbid, a death to getting stuck in traffic to like an email being sent to the wrong person. And I would say that another huge one for all New Yorkers is a lot of interpersonal effectiveness. What are we looking for out of our relationships? How are we showing up? What are our expectations? How do expectations in general get in the way of us feeling connected to other people or getting what we want and giving what we want to other people?
Expectations are huge. That's like such a huge part of, that's a huge thing that I'm working on right now, personally, professionally, wedding, everything.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have time for a face off, which is
Yeah,
quick fire
let's
questions
do
that are
it.
meant to be answered in 2 to 3 questions? Okay. I'm going to throw a new one in there just because this might be more than 2 to 3 sentences, but I'm so curious what your morning and evening practices are.
Sure.
Being in the work that you do.
Yeah. Okay. So morning, I will always set an alarm for the same time because I'm a big believer in certain sleep hygiene things. So you have to wake up within the same 4 hours every single day, 2 hours before, 2 hours after your average time. Otherwise, it fucks with your circadian rhythm, and my circadian rhythm is fucked up enough. So I set an alarm for the same exact time. Usually what I attempt to do is get up. I have a hatch thingy now. I love my hatch thingy. It's like changed. If I never have to hear my phone alarm ever again, it will be too soon. Like, so I have my hatch. It has this little like flute sounds and it's light that comes on. And then I attempt to get up. I always will like let my dog out of her crate. I'll walk her. That's like my immediate sort of automatic ritual is like, and then I try to go to Pilates class. I really like Pilates and I am not a nighttime person anymore. I used to be, but now I'm like an 8 p.m. kind of girly. And so I would say my routine really focuses on being, keeping a steady, consistent wake up time and giving myself many hours before I start seeing patients. I am not a person who can get up at 8 and start seeing patients at 8:15. They will not get the best of me and I will not be okay. So in terms of my morning practice, that's really, for me, it's wake up time, consistency, slowing myself down enough to give myself space. For the evening, I've tried a lot of different stuff. I've journaled before. I have a hard time kind of sticking to some of those more traditional routines. They don't speak to me as much. What I like to do is finish work, eat, have a sweet treat. I always have a sweet, like it's either frozen yogurt, ice cream in the freezer, cookies. Like I have something, I just like, it's sort of like a down regulation for me. And then I like literally get into bed, I change into pajamas, get into bed, generally speaking by 9 p.m. and talk to 2 people that I love, my boyfriend and either my sister or my best friend. And then I put on my audiobook and I fall asleep and I set a timer on it so that I know that I'm not listening to it for the whole entire night. And that's my routine. I'm very to me, routines are all about consistency. It can be anything as long as it's consistent.
Totally. They act as pillars as your like in your life. I love that you call 2 people that you love. I feel like I'm really trying to foster just deeper connections. I feel like I've been in my little silo for the past few years and I'm like ready to break through and really just nurture the relationships because I don't know, I feel like I need to get back. Also receive too, but
Yeah. I mean, it's both. It's both. Like giving to people and like listening to somebody is just as like restorative as like sharing something or getting something from that person, in my opinion.
Totally. Okay, diving into Face Off. So again, these are quick fire questions that are meant to be answered in 2 to 3 sentences.
Cool.
Ready?
Yeah. Ready.
Okay. What are you currently doing to learn and grow right now?
Therapy, practicing mindfulness around my own anxieties, particularly in relationships, and trying to be the best friend, teacher, and clinician that I can be. Those are always on my mind, and I'm always looking for feedback on those things.
Love that. How are you slowing down and resacreding life right now?
My boyfriend tore his Achilles tendon in March, and he moved himself back to Connecticut to his family house. He had an empty house. And so since March, have been going to Connecticut from Thursday to Tuesday every week. And it has been, I'm a city girl. I grew up in the city, never thought I'd want to live in the suburbs. And it has been literally life-changing to be in the suburbs, to slow myself down, to not really give a shit like what other people are doing or who I need to see. Like, I just don't care anymore. And it's been incredibly informative for me.
Nature is the biggest healer, and it's like so wise. Like it has all the healings that you need.
Literally.
What's a recent challenge that you faced that you were scared of, but you overcame?
I had to let an employee go. My first employee that I ever hired, I had to let her go before. This was several months ago, but it still stays with me. I had to let her go before she even started working for me. And it was I felt a lot of guilt. I felt a lot of shame, a lot of like self-anger and making decisions that I decided to make out of my own desperation and not listening to red flags. So that was a really hard thing. And actually having that conversation was incredibly challenging for me. At the end of the day, I just like being a nice person, even though I'm pretty good at giving feedback. So that's still something I think about as I build my business and my team, right? All of my hiring that has come after that has been informed by that.
That's incredible that you actually had the awareness though and the intention to let her go before she started. Like I'm all about hiring slow. So there is that integration period to be like yes or no before I actually take time integrating them. Hire slow, fire fast. It's like one of the best teachers.
I learned that the hard way. My boyfriend's a consultant. He's like, yeah, didn't you know that? I'm like, I didn't fucking know that, obviously. Like
Cancer moon and Cancer rising. I feel you.
I'm sorry. It's just yucky.
Yeah. Okay, 2 more. What is one thing you wish people knew about you?
Oh my God, everything. That's the hardest question ever. I don't even know how to answer it. I just love getting to know people. I love the opportunity for people to understand that I am a Capricorn and I am a Cancer. I am an incredibly sensitive person and I am also an incredibly reliable and consistent person. And I think depending on the time of day that you see me, you might get one or the other. And so understanding that I do carry that dialectic within me, I'm like the most giving and also like I need a lot.
Amen. Me too. Capricorn moon, Cancer sun.
Yeah. So we have like opposites, but yeah.
Oh yeah. And then Aries rising. So I'm out there with that fire.
Love.
Yeah. Okay. Last but not least, what can we expect from you growing forward?
Oh my God, so many exciting things. I really feel so grateful to. I'm like actually potentially gonna cry. Like the team that I'm growing, I'm gonna cry because I'm ovulating.
Okay, let it out.
I am really grateful that I'm in a healthy relationship that's really supportive. I'm really grateful to like my closest friends and confidants who are my best friend is my podcast co-host. She's helping me build my business. She's my inspiration. I'm really grateful to my little sister who is like always there for me. And so all of these supports are like continuing to lift me up to allow me to reach my fullest potential with the support that I need. And so seeing big changes from downtown behavioral wellness, from all new branding colors to different offerings that we're giving, new clinicians, different opportunities that I'm being able to engage in, and whether it be press, podcasts, and just growing out what downtown behavioral wellness to its fullest as both a clinical practice and a wellness center.
Well, you're really making waves and impact. And I love our conversation. We're going to have you back because there truly is so much more that I want to dive deeper into. And I just love your work and adore you and your energy. And yeah, I'm excited to keep in touch.
Thank you so much. We'll like have dinner, the 4 of us, because my boyfriend runs my business, part of it too. So this will be good.
Yeah,
really fun.
I love that. Okay, more soon. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.